We talked a lot about, if I could,
Hmm?
we talked a lot about race relations, and we had Coons in here the other day, and it was really interesting to me because he talked about, well, I live on the east side, and I live in a predominantly black neighborhood, and we all get along, and there's no race, we don't fight with each other. And he didn't go as far as to say there's no race relations problems, but he went through the three major incidents in the last decade or so: the Renata Frazier, the Mike Williams, and the Ricky Davis.
Oh.
And he said two of them were not about race at all, but about politics and about people trying to get ahead, and that the Renata Frazier was definitely about, it was directed at her because she was black. I just wanted to see what your reaction to that was, because he seemed to be kind of saying that some of this perception that we have great race relations problems in the city, is trumped up by activists and whatnot.
There's definitely, I think it's obvious just in terms of the physical appearance of our neighborhoods and that kind of stuff, as that there's obviously economic and racial divide in this community. I think it's gotten better in terms of race relations. It's one of the first, I've been involved in this work for a very long time. I've been to more race studies circle type things before I ever came to Springfield. So I've been somewhat of a student of it, in the sense of I've tried to learn a lot about it and educate myself and enlighten myself to these issues since I've been an adult. So for a very long time. And then I mentioned, I grew up in a very divided, Dalton was a white community surrounded by very, very poor black communities. And and we had, issues as into the 80s when things started to kind of change in the community. I grew up with friends of mine who were very, very prejudiced people, and grew up very, very prejudiced people. So these were people that I interfaced with all the time. I mean, these were friends of mine. So I heard the attitudes, and I know the perspectives that some people bring to this. Those kids got it from home. It was very prevalent in their homes. And so I think to say that a community like Springfield does not have any race relations problems is part of the problem, I think, that we have. Because I think if we cannot, even as a community, get to the point where we acknowledge that there are issues that we have to do better at, and I think this is one of them, I think that in and of itself is a problem. I'll be honest with you, the question that I got at that forum on race relations, and if you remember, the question was not, do you think there's a racial divide? The question was, there's a racial divide in Springfield, but what do you do about it? But the response that came from that, and oh my God, Sheila Stocks-Smith is talking about racial divide in Springfield and all this, attention, it kind of surprised me, because I'm thinking, is this like something people don't know? Are we at the point in this community that we are still just even questioning this, and this is like a big deal when somebody actually says, yes, we need to address this? So I think, and I have a lot of friends, and friends, colleagues, however you want to, say, in the black community, and I've built a lot of strong relationships here in this community and in my work before I came to this community. And working with minorities has been one of the most, I think, enriching things in my life. So I wish everybody felt that way, and I think we should. I think we, there are just some fantastic people that I have met, and like I said, they have made my life more complete and more full. And they certainly, when you talk to them, they, based on history and hundreds of years of this, they would, you'd find very few, I think, African Americans that would question whether or not that there's a racial that we have a race relations problem in this country, and I don't think that Springfield's any exception to that.
And I think that when Frank Coons, when he got into that discussion, I think it started off with a question about the minority presence in the police department and in the fire department, and whether you see that as a problem, and if so, how do you address that? Can you give us, first of all, do you see it as, is there an underrepresentation of minorities in police and fire, and if so, what would your plan be to get that number up?
Well, I do think it's a problem, and it's a problem that we've been trying to address, I think, in this community for quite some time, and there's been a number of different plans. I mean, Karen and Sarah had a plan, and Davlin kind of did something a little bit differently, and now we have a black police chief, I think, which makes a huge difference. And I would say it's not just with African Americans, it's with women as well. I don't know what the solution is for this. I mean, we've wrestled with this for a very long time, but I think what you have to do is you have to be continually trying new things. I mean, it's obviously not working. I mean, the processes we have in place are not working, and I think we have to make sure that the processes that are in place and the procedures and the interview process and all the the process that one goes through does not have inherent biases to it. Number one, so in every I know every few years or 10 years or whatever, there's kind of new ways to try to look at doing this, because it's been a problem not just in Springfield, it's been a problem across the country in trying to diversify. I think we have to start younger too. I mean, we have to start with our kids younger. In the African American community, we have a high percentage of kids and men that are, have been incarcerated and who are have had some contact with the law. And when you go to apply for a police job or a fire job, that you don't pass the background check, you don't get through. And I'm not saying that's all of it, but I think that's a factor. And I think, again, we have to be talking to our students, to our kids and our children early, and letting them know that these are good jobs, these are good city jobs, and that these, you can even get these jobs without a college degree. I mean, these are a good path for a lot of people, and for women as well. And career development work, I think, is very important. And we have to get back and get to these kids earlier. When we were kids, I don't know how old you guys are, but I think you and I are about the same age. Every boy wanted to be a fireman. Every boy wanted to be a policeman. Now the girls didn't, because we didn't really think that was necessarily a path for us. Now it is a path for us, and but I'm not so sure many women would even see it as a path, even today. As a necessarily path. And we're also competing. Minorities and women are also has so much other things to choose from in our careers and stuff now too. So I think that's part of it. But I do think that there are women and minorities that would want to be in police and fire, and I just don't think they see it as a career path. So I think we have to do a much better job at educating and helping. And there's when I was at the school district, I mean, one of the things that I was charged with doing were these Saturday academies that Dr. Milton does for various different kinds of things. There's lots of different kinds of programs. I mean, we were looking at a public safety academy, something like that, where you could get kids started early and get them, sort of immersed in what is public safety and how does it work, and you start them off young. And that physicians pipeline program that SIU is partnered with School District 186 is something that I was involved in as well. And I mean, those are the kinds of great programs. It's not just a one-time shot. It's not just a sort of a week summer camp, so to speak. It's a long-term program where kids get in and there's a commitment, and you keep following through. I'd like to see us be able to partner with the school district on those kinds of things. Look for funding together where we can do that kind of thing.
Now, Mike Houston's talked about changing the way the testing goes and the pool you select from, so that you could select any minority candidates until you get your numbers up. Would you be in favor of doing
You know,
something
again,
like that?
I would want to look to see what sort of the modern standards are that we're using. That I think is the same proposal that Karen Hasera tried to use, and it didn't work then. So I don't know if it's going to work now. But there's obviously a lot of factors as to why that is. We're also not hiring very many police officers, which is part of the problem. And when you're letting police officers go, it's always the ones at the bottom, you know, that go too. So I think, you know, you've got those issues, or, you know, as you bring people in, you know, there's just not enough of a pool coming in even to be, I mean, he wants to do it until he gets to 25% or something, 15%, or take 25% off until,
of all hires.
well, it's,
until we
you
reach
know,
15.
I guess if you just look at how the situation is now, I mean, that would take a very, very long time, and we just we're not hiring that many
Of course,
people.
so would raising kids better.
Sure,
'cause they're gonna
absolutely,
take 10 years to
absolutely. I mean,
get
I'm
to
not
police.
opposed to it. I think if it looks like, I think minorities, women, African Americans, women, and others do not also want to see us lower qualifications either. I mean, we want to get qualified people, and I'm not saying that proposal necessarily would do that, but I think it's something that we have to consider when we're looking at these proposals. No one, including women and minorities, want to be perceived as though we just got in there because, you know, the standards were lower. So, you know, and I don't think the public wants the standards lower. Nobody wants the standards lower, including us. So, you know, I think we have to look at that when we craft these procedures. I was part of the early on, I think it was under Chief Harris before he left, and I think it was before I came in as education liaison. I think it was in the summer. But I was on a couple of those interview panels when they changed the process and they added the interview portion to it, and I think they contracted out to some company that, you know, did all this, and it was supposed to be high standards and all the new, you know, kind of stuff. And I found the process, that the piece that I was involved in, to be quite good. I mean, I thought it was done very well, and it seemed to be, you know, I guess as objective as you can have in an interview type process. There's always some subjectivity that's part of that, but you know, even that process has not necessarily worked. So, you know, I think it's one of these issues that has been around a long time, and that we have to have the commitment from the top to have a sustained effort and sustained focus, where we just keep trying, you know, new things. I don't think I would have a minority recruiter that lives in Milwaukee, you know, or Madison. But, you know, I didn't, again, talk about another thing maybe I raised as an issue when I was there. I didn't think that was a very good idea. I thought it was a good idea when he was here, you know, but okay, idea, I guess. But, you know, then to continue and pay someone, you know, that just was problematic, I thought.
I hope I'm not overstepping by asking one more quick one, I hope. But you had a press conference, and I know it was well attended, when you announced the consolidation of community relations with economic development. A question I have about that: community relations investigates discrimination complaints. Some of those discrimination complaints may well be against the companies that you're wooing for economic development. Isn't that an inherent conflict of interest to have that within the same department?
You know, I think it's, first of all, I think it's really hard in a climate where we're talking about having to streamline and cut government and find savings to have a department of 6 people. You know, Public Works is 219 people. You know, whatever, the police is 280 people. You know, so to have its own department for 6 people, I think just from the standpoint of, you know, just fiscal management is not a good idea.
I don't think those directors are very highly paid. Well, Farmer is 100 and
Sandy's
Sandy's
70
about
or
80.
something, or 80. You know, actually, I think Sandy got bumped during the administration, during the Devlin administration. He was one of the lowest paid. And I don't know why that was, if that was reflective of the fact that it was a smaller, you know, a smaller group. I think that we can do that. Those departments were together before. They were together under Langfelder's administration. It was the Department of Public Affairs. There were like 8 different functions underneath that department. Karen Hasera, I think, pulled them out perhaps, and then when you look at the, and when you look at the history of that, and Davlin pulled more out. I mean, so there's more departments than ever than when you go back. So they were together before. I think, it's a legitimate issue, and it'd have to be, but I'm not saying that we're not going to do what that department currently does. I mean, they still do that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering.
And they don't even have to. They don't necessarily even have to live. I mean, they don't all have to live together. I mean, you can still. I mean, I don't know whether they would still live where they live, or whether they. I'd like to see us use our library a little bit more for sort of these public kinds of offices where we've got some interface where there's access for the public to. And I'm not saying that, before you guys write that, I'm not saying that that's where it's going to go. I'm just saying that I think that that's,
landlord loses the rent.
an option. Yeah, and then they lose the rent. But downtown Springfield ain't going like that. But, we have to be looking at ways where we're going to be saving money. I think that's one of them. And I think it's been done before. I think it can be done.
Okay. One last question, unless anybody else had anything to bring up. But we did not bring up just the kind of general, the issue of Springfield being friendly enough to business. When Frank Coons was here the other day, he made a point that city government is often an impediment to business. It's hard bureaucracy to navigate sometimes. We have a lot of rules about landscaping and such that make it troublesome for business people who want to expand and move and whatnot. Do you think Springfield is friendly enough to business overall? And if you're mayor, what can you do to improve the business environment?
Well, I had, during another press conference, I did say that I was going to, early in the administration, I was going to commission a task force on city business, community task force on looking at that very issue and how we can create a more business-friendly community. If you talk to the business community, you talk to people in the business community, they do not feel that it's a very friendly environment. When you talk to the neighborhood groups, they don't feel like it's a very friendly environment for people who are trying to rehab homes or coming in and trying to make things better in the community. Now, at the same time, there's lots of rules and regulations that are there for a reason. And but I think that we need to look at if they're excessive, if they're outdated, if there are things on the books that don't need to be there, if there's procedures that can be streamlined and we can do things differently to make it easier. I mean, I think that job creation has to be, and I've made it, on my three, main themes, is job creation has to be a major focus of what, outside of the basic city services. I mean, I've placed job creation as, the top city priority outside of our basic city services. And so we're going to have to be working with the business community and finding out ways that we can incentivize and help them. But again, I have said too that I want to see us, if we're going to be incentivizing things or we're going to be making things easier, I want to see that directed toward the priorities that we've set out. And one of my main priority is redeveloping the inner core of the city. So I'm not necessarily just talking about, I think there's ways we can make it just easier for business in general, but I also think if we're going to start talking about certain kinds of incentives and that stuff, I think they should be targeted that promote the priorities that the administration and that we want to see here in the city. I had a conversation with a man, again, you just hear lots of things when you're out there and you're talking to people, and it was a guy, I won't say what business it was, but it was a business that's come to town that has a number of stores around town, and said that their business has expanded to many states in the region, and they found Springfield to be the worst community they have ever dealt with. Now, again, you're hearing that, you're kind of shaking hands and you're talking to people, and but that sounded kind of concerning to me. That
Must
here's
not be a payday lender then.
no, it wasn't payday lender. It was a good business. It was a good business that we would all like here, and that we do like here. And so to hear stuff like that, clearly, again, it's one person's perspective. It's you're talking to someone at one point in time, but I've heard that with other people as well. Not quite that strong, but when you start to put all these things that you hear together, you start to think, well, maybe we're not very business friendly, and maybe we need to all sit down and start thinking about what are the strategies to make us more business friendly, because we're clearly not attracting the business development that we want. So why is that? Maybe this is one of the reasons why that is.
Do you have any feelings why that might be, from an outsider's perspective going in?
I hear, just about excessive regulation, about red tape, about, things taking too long to go through the process, just these kinds of procedural things. People feeling like, again, I hear a lot, people feeling that the bureaucrats, so to speak, the people doing the work, that the administration is more about what you can't do as opposed to how can we make this work, or what can we do, or how can we try to make things happen. It's more about, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And I've also heard a number of complaints about just not good communication about what it is you can and cannot do. So you get in and you're told you have to do this, and so then they do it, and then they come back and they say, oh, well, didn't we tell you you're supposed to do this too? And then they got to go back, and then they're like, oh, well, then we got to do this, and then they come back and say, oh, guess what? That changed, and now you got to do this. So I hear that a lot, where there's just this sense that the left hand and the right hand don't really know what's going on, and that it's not communicated very well to the people that are trying to interface with the system.
Okay. Anybody else? Wow, that's a long one.
Sorry, was it?
Is there anything we didn't?
That's why I don't do well on these 60-second responses in the forums. It doesn't. It's just not my.
And Jerry Lambert is very military, did you know?
Yeah, he is. He came from the military, didn't he?
I know.
Yeah.
Is there anything we didn't bring up that you want to say, or any question that didn't, any issue that didn't arise?
No, I just think. I think one of the frustrations for me in this campaign is that I feel that my background and my experience is somehow, just not viewed in the same way as my opponents, and that's been a frustration for me, because, I think the work that I've done in this community and before is very, very valuable work, and it has, I think it's more relative. I've worked around public policy. That's what governments do. And I've done that for 28 years. I have an opponent who manages a restaurant. I have an opponent who, now Coons has been in city government. But, he hasn't, I hate to say he's not much of an opponent. I think maybe he is, but he doesn't seem to be trying very hard. He's not out at a lot of these forums. And then, Houston, who, touts all of his experience as, the mayor, who was actually the mayor under a form of government that is completely separate. He didn't have public works. He didn't have fire. He didn't have the utility. He didn't have finance. It was just a completely different animal. And that, and then his bank, being in a bank, which is great experience. I think that's valuable business experience. But I feel like my experience as being, working the community and being able to, the state, advocacy at the state level, advocacy at the national level. These are things I've done. I've done strategic planning. I can coordinate programs and projects and initiatives in my sleep. I can set goals. I've done all this stuff. I know how to do, strategic planning. I know how to do program development. I know how to do evaluation of services. And I know how to network, and I know how to make things happen, because that's what I've been doing in this community for a very long time. So it's a different kind of experience, and so I understand that people maybe don't understand it as well, but I think it's a very relative experience to working in government, because
You mean
that's
relevant, don't you?
What did I say?
Relative.
Relative.
Relative? Okay, I thought you meant relevant.
Relevant. What did I say? No, I meant
Relative.
relevant. Did I say relative?
Twice.
Sorry,
That's
relevant.
okay.
Thank you, Bernie.
I'm trying to,
Like my
keep it on point.
my old school nuns wouldn't like me using those words. No, I think it's the kind of work that is what government does. So I think that my experience is actually closer to business experience, which is that I've said in this campaign. There are elements of the business model that certainly apply to government, but it's not government. It's not a top-down. It's not about profit. It's not about. That's not what government does. Government is about serving people, and that's what I've been doing for 28 years.
Okay.